the story called The Yellow Boots continued. The flag was one of the patriotic relics of 1914, done in a caterum shop after cheers and beers with pals, following flaring mental hatred of the sergeant instructor drilling the squad to breaking point on the parade ground. Over rocks and rushy tufts, while 34 hounds followed less than 300 yards behind. His line of running had been in a loop, and he was approaching the Rattlebrook again, where it merged into the yellow winter water of the Tavy. He plunged into the river, foaming and swirling among black and pink blotched boulders and rocky tables which for centuries the floods had slowly carved. It sucked him under and spun him in its twist. A spur of rock held him by the trousers until they ripped and wrapped round his legs. Hauling himself out, 76 waded back into the river again, when the leading hounds viewed him and gave tongue. He was carried 100 yards down the water in less than a minute to where a tree-grown islet divided the current. All the air was knocked from his chest. On hands and knees he crawled to the right bank. The strings of his thigh and calf muscles were drawn tight, and each lung was bayoneted. A spike of rock had torn his back, and the Union Jack was fouled by the blood of the ruined patriot. A mist strayed through Tavy Cleave, and the broken screes towering hundreds of feet above were revealed and hidden by clouds. An old hill-fox, deep in a clitter, sniffed as he passed below, and listened contentedly to the hounds which had crossed the river. The raven that had observed 76 for nearly 3 hours croaked a treble croak to its mate from a scour of rock 400 feet above the toiling figure. It was now between 2:30 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Feeling for the pin, 76 realized that he had thrown it away with the clothes. Ever since he had been blown by a high-explosive shell out of a communication trench in the Hohenzollern redoubt with burst sandbags and pieces of a shattered Coley, his chum, a spectre had fretted his life. Always, and especially in drink, since his 14 days in the hospital of Hausbrook, recovering from the shock of the bright shell blast, he had been liable to moods both morose and violent. At Hausbrook, an inspecting surgeon general, a regular officer with 2 rows of ribbons and honours, suspected him of malingering, and ordered him immediately to be sent back to duty in the line. The thought of his wife had kept the spectre away, as afterwards the companionship of the pin in his cell had been a barrier against the dark fears which came into his disrupted mind. When he knew that the pin was lost, 76 threw up his arms and wailed. He saw what other men would not have seen had they been with him. The new consciousness was accompanied by a sense of ease and lightness. All pain and fatigue left him. He seemed to be floating along with the least touch of his toes on rocks and water. The body of 76 was hobbling in the smooth and shallow bed of the Leat, which, serpentining through the moor, eventually brought water for use in the arsenic mines of Mary Tavy. But a Coldstream Guardsman also was walking on the platform of the Tube Railway at the Elephant and Castle station. The platform was thick with the smell of many women and children sitting and lying against the wall. He was relieved that the journey was finished, and hitching up rifle on right shoulder, he shoved away into the lift. Outside the dear old boozer where he had first met his wife. Now there was a war on, and a bloke couldn't get a pint after 9 o'clock. The street was dark. A tram-car passed him, bumping and clattering, all its lights blacked over except for the least glimmers. He lit a cigarette, and the voice of a special constable, riding past on a lampless bicycle, cried out in agitated sternness, "Put that light out! Second warning's been given!" He answered with a laugh, "Don't get the wind up, mate!" As he strode along the Old Kent Road, gunfire broke out, and 100 white beams swept the sky. The yelling civvies might cut and run, but not a Coley. He whistled as he walked. Zim, zup, fell the splinters of anti-aircraft shells. Whoosh! Crack! That was a nose-cap that had split the paving stone just behind him. He walked on to his street, erect and with cap peak pulled low over his eyes. Near his house he stopped and looked upwards. A groaning had opened in the sky above him. It filled the street. It snored gigantically through the darkness. Whoosh, whoosh, an immense slow corkscrewing of sound that grew as though the earth was falling out of its orbit. The soldier crouched under a window ledge, while a starving cat meowed to him and rubbed itself against his cheek. Poor Moggy, he hadn't no milk to give. He stroked the cat, whose purring was drowned in the tremendous rushing noise descending. It was like 1,000 minis coming down. The Minenwerfen in the salient had made a lesser noise. He waited and sweated, for it was coming straight at him. He pressed himself against the wall, against the bricks made greasy by children's hands, holding the cat protected in his arms, his eyes closed, his breath stopped. A red glare showed through his lids, and immediately a stunning detonation flung him with the cat into the gutter. Houses swayed and tumbled and roared down in clouds of bricks and dust. He ran up the street, for the Zeppelin torpedo had fallen just about where he lived. The bomb had flattened 16 houses, but his house was safe, except for a splintered door. "Won't old Doll be surprised to see me?" he thought, jubilant that he was still alive. He pushed the door down, crashing in upon the landlady, an old widow woman who was wearing a crimson flannel nightgown. Her bluish-white face was beyond speech. She moaned something and pointed at a broken methylated spirit bottle on the floor. "Where's Doll?" he asked. "Upstairs?" She stood and moaned in the crude fumes of her own breath. "You're boozed, Ma," he said. She let out a shriek when he pointed upstairs. "I told her not to do it! I told her not to!" she moaned. Her candle wobbled and fell. He ran up the stairs, pulling himself up with his hands, and stones out of the wall fell away with his clutch. 76 had reached the ruin of Redford Farm. He turned the handle of the bed-sitting room. The door was locked. A man's voice said, "What the bleeding hell?" With the butt of his rifle he broke in the panels and burst the lock. A gas jet burned with a small blue flame. The soldier turned the tap and it flittered like a yellow bat. He snarled and drew his bayonet out of the scabbard and fixed it. The man whined, "Here, I say, mate, what's the bleeding game?" Then he shrieked and hid his face under the bedclothes with the soldier's wife. The soldier stabbed them under the patched counterpane. He saw the spirit of his wife fly up on white wings. The owl flew out of the chimney of Redford Farm. But the bloke she had picked up wouldn't die. After each lunge of the bayonet he came alive again, with more and more faces which tried to bite him with their fangs. The soldier thrust and pointed and parried. Groin, belly, right nipple, left nipple, throat, in, act, on guard, just as the sergeant instructor had yelled at him during bayonet practice on the stuffed sacks at Caterham. He smashed with the butt-stroke at their jaws and eyes, but the faces pulled him down. He did not care, they did not hurt him, and with a laugh he felt himself withdrawn from them into darkness. Redford Farm, near the Leat which leads to the arsenic mines, had been a ruin many years before the last run of the Inklefell Harriers. One chimney-stack was still standing at the eastern end of the farmhouse the Saturday before, for on that day, wandering over the moor, the young man who was the guest of the Squire of Lidford had disturbed a white owl that was dozing away the daylight up the flue among the fire-marked stones. But on the Monday, when Miss Molly Inklefell, lost in the mist for some hours, and leading her mare, lame in the near fore, arrived at Redford Farm about 3 o'clock, it had collapsed, as though someone had tried to climb up it. A raven flew over the heap of stones and damp mortar dust lying on the ground. Several red-muzzled hounds came to her and leapt up affectionately. They remained by her, 2 of them licking her face, while she lay pale and still in a fainting fit, caused by the sight of 2 shin bones sticking out of a pair of yellow boots. The next story is called The White Stoat. I really owe my salvation to my friend Chica. Perhaps I should explain at the beginning, without false modesty or equally false braggadocio, that I am often a rather foolish sort of person. I do things on the spur of the moment, acting on hunches, sudden ideas of jokes, etc. Once, fancying that I disliked the new village sign, St. George of Hame killing a dragon, I covered it one night with flour paste and newspapers. At the time I thought it was funny, but very soon I found that no one else thought so, and quite soon after I felt it was only ridiculous of me to have done that. Many apologies followed. Even so, I was established as a scatterbrained fool. My recent business deal was done in a rash moment, too. I should explain that I had a field above the village which I loved. I had planted trees, built a hut, dug a drive of sorts, made a garden. Oh, that garden, when the rabbits had done with it! There were hundreds of rabbits in the stone and earth banks that make the boundaries of fields in North Devon. A doe had 6 litters a year, 6 to a litter. That's 36 a year. Of course, nothing like 36 survived. The old bucks dug out a litter when they found one and ate the young rabbits. Buzzard hawks pounced on rabbits from the air, while weasels hunted them in the long grass of the field, as well as Chica. Lurcher dogs ran over the down at night, while their masters, young bricklayers and carpenters, waited by their motorcycles at the gateways of fields. Even so, rabbits abounded. They were a pest. I could grow nothing in my field garden. So one day, despite the memories of nearly 2 decades in my little hilltop field, where in the hut among the trees I had written many of my books, on sudden impulse, I sold the field. I knew at the time I was doing a foolish thing. The field and everything about it, every tree and clump of wildflowers, primroses, borage, chicory, centaurea, were known to me intimately. Then there was Chica. He could, of course, look after himself, but still he was an old friend and might easily be shot by someone who did not know his value. Why had I sold my pied-à-terre to the sort of person I had sold it to? After all, it had been my extra home for many years, and the new owner obviously cared naught for its associations. He knew nothing about the country. How could he? He came from the East End of London and was in the fur trade. Please don't mistake my meaning. The East End of London has some very fine people living in it, descendants of English country people who were the backbone of the race. Poor dears, many of them were forced to leave the land during the Industrial Revolution and take to the satanic mills of that dark and congested area. The new owner was not of that English country stock. He was a fat little man in the fur trade, an oriental look about him. I think he must have made a lot of money in the war, for when he came down to Devon to buy a farm, he drove down in a Rolls-Royce, and he smelled of fish and chips. You think I'm prejudiced and a snob? Then come with me and judge for yourself. There he is, standing by the gate of the field. His field now, oh Lord. Don't make a sound. Let us creep round the corner of this stone bank, called a hedge in the West Country, and take a peek at him. There he stands on this warm, sunny day, wearing a black Homburg hat, the sort of hat made popular by Anthony Eden. An Anthony Eden hat here in the wilds of North Devon? And that is the new farmer, the owner of my wild sanctuary and hideout. Could anything be more out of place than that hat and all it signifies? The hat was once an idea, of course. But the idea has spread in successive ripples over the years, from Foreign Office to the West End clubs, from the clubs to big business, and from big business to smaller business, until today no commercial traveller can afford, as the saying goes, to be without one. And since fashions usually die when they reach the majority, you may guess that the original splash from Eden, from whom the concentric ripples have spread, is about to be followed by another splash, this time of the Eden hat going into the river of oblivion. Ave atque vale to the Foreign Office hat. I, a supposed wild man, a natural-born escapist from civilization, have sold my hilltop field to a black hat. My dear Henry Williamson, you do talk so nowadays. Please may we know what all this is about? Will you come to the point? What is chica, anyway? And why is the stranger looking so intently over the gate? And what does he, an obvious townie, want with a 2-acre field on the edge of the moor? The stranger, a natural-born financier, is wondering whether, after all, he has been wise to buy the field and put a caravan in it, ready to evacuate himself, wife, and family in the event of another war. He is in two minds about it. He is thinking of unrationed farmhouse butter, eggs, and perhaps rabbits in that foreseeable time of grim necessity and blackout. I know this because before I sold him the field, I told him about the rabbits. He said he did not mind them. He offered me a very good price for the field. He had a lot of money, rolls and rolls of pound notes, all smelling of fish and chips, in his suitcase in the car. He paid a deposit of 1/10 of the agreed price, and I gave him a receipt pending completion of the purchase through solicitors. With the money I intended to go and buy a cottage in Connemara to fish for trout in the summer and right in the winter. Now, let us creep away and watch through another gap in the northern hedge. You will see why in a moment. The wind is blowing from the west, from where my writing hut, or the stranger's as it is now, stands among the trees, to a pile of stones in the eastern corner of the field. Now keep your eyes skinned, and you may see something. I fancy that the stranger by the gate has already noticed something peculiar. By the way, did I mention that his name is McShankles? The aquiline profile, rising out of an astrakhan collar, was visible as McShankles stared over the field. Foreign Office hat, sideboard whiskers, imitation tortoiseshell spectacles, 2 complete sets of health service teeth, top and bottom. McShankles, a short, stout little man, halfway through life, was thinking that a trespasser must be in his field. There the evidence was, a long strip of white paper blowing across the grass. McShankles pushed himself higher with his toes and looked round to see who had dropped the paper. It had not been there a moment before, when he had been in the field. He must see about putting up his new notice board immediately. It had been ordered from the sign-writer within a couple of hours of his buying the field. The sooner that notice board was up, the better. He would go and fetch it at once. A padlock for the 5-barred gate, and a strand or 2 of barbed wire twisted round the top bar. His head full of thoughts of boards and thorns and wire and paper, McShankles got into his motor car, bought for a bargain price during the Blitz on London, and drove away into the town. McShankles considered himself to be both shrewd and observant. But had the eyes of McShankles been of wider use to him, he would have noticed that the long white strip, rippling as paper in the wind, was moving over the grass in a direction contrary to that in which the wind was blowing. Less than half a minute after the departure of McShankles, the white rippling object had reached the middle of the field. It was moving on a track it had run along many times before, a track belonging to itself, between the heap of stones in the east corner to the hut in the west corner. Not only did it own the track through the grass, but it owned the field as well. Its sense of ownership was similar to that of McShankles, but more elemental. Its angry defiance of any intrusion was coupled with a raging desire to break with teeth the neck of any enemy. Nearly everything was its enemy, and nearly everything ran from it, for it was an albino dog stoat. The stoat lived a life harder and more eventful than any other stoat in the West Country, for it had been born without colour, except for its eyes, which were pink, and the tip of its tail, which was black. The stoat's hairy coat, covering a long and sinuous body, was white as the snow, which often covered the small intake fields below the moor in winter. Nearly everything saw the white stoat as he ran prowling, head held high and sniffing the air, over green pasture and brown ploughland, and through the thorns and brambles growing on the banked hedges, dividing the fields reclaimed or intaken from the moor. So his life was one of endless trouble, since nothing in nature likes a stoat, except a stoat, and me, a natural-born, etc. The white stoat was hurrying, but he was not hunting. Many times a day he ran with eagerness across his field into the plantation to play with the 5 stoats who lived under a wood stack at the foot of a beech tree. There lived his mate, of normal colouring, pale reddish-brown hair, yellow-white chest and belly, and black tip to her tail. The cubs were normal, too, extremely playful, delighting to leap and scramble, bite and wrestle with the big white dog, their father. The white stoat had reached the middle of the field when a dark brown bird with a wingspan of more than 4 feet, wheeling in the sky a couple of 100 yards upwind, saw movement and immediately slanted down over the wind-sheared treetops of the beeches. The stoat saw the buzzard's intention and ran faster. He knew the big hawk, whose wailing cry often came down from the sky. The buzzard fed on rabbits, moles, and snakes, which it dropped on from above and clutched in its scaly feet, piercing with sharp horned talons to tear its prey with hooked beak. The hawk was stronger and much heavier than the stoat, who saw its eyes and beak and hanging legs under the line of its outspread wings grow larger and larger as it glided upon him. The stoat thereupon stopped, his forepaws on the ground, his head and neck raised and pointing at the buzzard. He crouched until it lifted great wings to drop on him, and then he shifted and sprang into the air. The buzzard, who had meant to grip him across the back, saw a small white flattened circle set with whiskers that broke across with sharp, clicking teeth. The hawk seemed to bounce off the angry pointed nose. It flapped its broad wings to keep itself safely above furious pale eyes. It flapped heavily over the stoat and turned in the wind, drawn back by the rippling white movement. It glided down to the stoat, spreading its yellow toes and black claws for the attack. The white ripple crouched and leapt sideways from the snatch of talons. Again the buzzard quailed before the snapping teeth, and, flapping into the upper air, sent a wailing cry down the wind. Whee! Another bird, black from bristled beak to toe, that was perching on the highest bough of an elderberry tree, stunted and lichen-crusted at the southwestern point of the beech plantation, heard the cry and started out of its reverie, for the carrion crow was contemplating the old nest from which its 4 nestlings had recently flown. Every black feather tightened when it saw the buzzard. Its craw swelled, its tail dipped, its beak opened, and "Scowl! Scowl! Scowl!" it called, harshly and rapidly. Its mate heard the familiar challenging cry and left the broken carcass it had been eating, rabbit in snare set by labourer, to fly to Seeing Point in a treetop. The crows had built their nest in one or other of the beech trees of the plantation for many years. They owned the spinney and the fields around it, and whenever they saw a winged or a 4-legged intruder, they drove it away from their property. "Quack! Quack! Hawk! Hawk!" said the first crow. Together they flew silently just above the green slope of the wind-sheared treetops. They fled on black wings at the buzzard, whose broader, longer wings made it a clumsy flyer in the lower air. "Quack! Quack!" flying in slanting flight towards the buzzard, meaning to peck out its feathers, a thing which the crows tried to do whenever they could get near enough to the mewling brown bird. Before its beak had closed again, the male crow saw the white stoat. The crow had seen the stoat many times before. "Gra! Gra!" he and his mate cried together, turning into the wind and slanting over the lane and the bramble-grown bank. The white stoat was not far from the beech plantation when the crows dived at him, one from either side. He stopped and ground his teeth. With open beak, the crow dived, but a yard from the ground flattened its wings and with a jeering "Gra!" passed over the stoat. The bird alighted 2 yards behind the stoat, while its mate flapped above and in front of it. The stoat stood up to meet the peck of the crow, and the crow, hopping quickly over the grass from behind, nipped the black tip of the stoat's tail. In this way they teased the angry animal for more than a minute, while he chattered and cried, "Lack, lack, lack!" Every time he attempted to run forward, he was poked and jabbed from behind by one or another of the crows. Fighting all the time, at last he was not very far from the bank whence he had started. Meanwhile the buzzard was soaring higher, watching black wing flaps and shifting white speck below. It soared over the northern field, stared at by another bird perched on the top of a thorn growing out of the bank, near a gate. This bird was the size of a crow, but more huddled-looking, and it had a whitey-grey face of bare skin. The buzzard was soaring up in a wide spiral upon rising air, whistling to its mate. Whee-oo! Whee-oo! The grey-faced bird launched itself off the thorn and with leisured beat of wings climbed into the air to look around. It was a sentinel rook, on guard while the rest of the colony of rooks was feeding in the field. The rook flew under the hawk and cried, "Da! Da!" Hearing the summons, the rooks looked up from the earth where they were digging potatoes. The buzzard never harmed them, and the wireworms and slugs in the potatoes were good. They went on digging again, knowing that old Sentinel was crying its "Da! Da!" from force of habit, since all hawks were disliked, but only one feared, and he was more than a mere hawk. He was a prince of the upper air, a peregrine falcon. The male carrion crow saw the rook flying under the buzzard and began to think. First one eye was cocked at the black and brown birds above, then the other, for a crow cannot reason until he has taken a double squint. His beak lifted higher, his craw swelled, he dipped, and "Quack, quack, quack, quack," he cried. The stoat bounded upon him, but the crow, still looking at the sky, hopped over his head, alighted behind him, and gave 4 more croaks. "Grrr!" answered the sentinel rook, leaving the buzzard and flying over the field to find out why Crow had called him. He saw the white peril, turned, and flew back quickly in silence. He was going to warn the entire colony. Usually rooks flew wide of carrion crows, whom they distrusted, for crows had been known to chase the little red mousehawks or kestrels over their rookery in spring, and in the general disturbance that greeted the hawk, to sneak into the trees and suck rooks' eggs. But against the white stoat, every bird's beak and wing was raised. "Quack, quack, quack, quack," cried the rook, wheeling over the edge of the potato field. His voice was very nearly that of a crow's. After all, they were of the same family, the rook branch having become mainly agricultural during the past few human civilizations. Called in the corvine family voice, every rook left worm, beetle, maggot, snail egg, and millipede, and flew to the assault. The potato diggers glided and swooped down to the grass of the field as soon as they saw the white ripple. They filled the air with cawing and the sound of wings. They alighted on the grass, making around the stoat a rough, excited circle that broke wherever the white peril ran in his grinding rage. Each rook urged his neighbour to hop forward and dap the fearful enemy on the head. Each rook was determined not to be the one to dap first. Their wide and simple eyes, filled with scared thoughts, looked from stoat to crow, from crow to each other. The carrion crow and his mate hopped about in the ring, feeling safe with so many beaks near them, and enjoying the game of peck and jump. And all the while they were apparently playing, the blue-black crows were watching their chance to peck out the white stoat's eyes. The eye is the titbit to all members of the corvidae. Sometimes a nervous rook would fly up with a squawk of alarm, but the croaks of the bolder crows were reassuring, and soon it had alighted in the circle again. Jackdaws passing over the field dropped among them and croaked with deep voices, for they too belonged to the family which shared ownership of all the fields and woods. They poked their grey poles and hard azure eyes between the dishevelled shoulders of the rooks, and cursed the white stoat, who in hot rage was giving off a most penetrating stench, which in itself was almost enough to keep them at a distance. Then came 4 magpies, sloping over the hedge one behind the other, their short wings flickering black and white as they made their long-tailed way against the wind. They scolded loudly, a harsh chattering like an old wooden police rattle when they saw what was being mobbed. After them came a pair of missel thrushes, who flew down boldly, the smallest birds present, and screamed in the face of the white stoat as he stood with swishing tail, with bared teeth, with blazing eyes, in a green space enclosed by the black and shifting mass. Then a strange thing happened. The sentinel rook, in a beech top, had sounded an urgent warning. Every bird became still. Then every bird looked up into the air and remained motionless in a shared moment. The sentinel rook had seen something more dreaded than even the sight of a man with a gun. 3 miles westwards, on his pitch 2,000 feet above the sea, Czech the backbreaker, the peregrine falcon, had seen the commotion of wings in the field and a white speck in the centre. Czech owned the air of the world. Even the eagle shifted under his stoop. Across the sky on level pinions he had glided, cutting round into the wind above the beech clump. So keen and vivid was the falcon's stereoscopic sight that he saw upheld beaks and eyes watching him 1,000 feet below. Crows and a white stoat and all aground. The proud falcon turned and swept away. One of the rooks on the ground had a face of parchment. Even the black bristles at the base of his beak or mattock were nearly worn away by constant prospecting in the soil. This ancient husband bird, one of the rookery elders of the colony, grouped about the Norman church in the village below, was one whose life was set in duty to others. He watched the peregrine falcon an eye-blink longer than the other rooks watched. He forgot the white stoat as he stared at barbed black wings which often he had heard hissing in the dreaded falcon swoop. Then a whiteness flashed. The old rook was on his back. He was squawking, his feathers were flying, his legs were kicking. He tried to screech a warning, but as his beak opened he shuddered, and the white stoat, red of muzzle and whiskers, ran upon the next rook. The grass was flattened by the draught of beating wings. "Craw!" cried the carrion crow, who had flown up only to return again. "Craw!" as he hopped to the stricken rook and pecked out its eyes. As soon as the black mob had scattered, the white stoat had turned towards the northern bank, carrying his head high. He had gone 1/3 of the way along his track when returning rooks, flying at him with open beaks but swerving a safe distance off, checked him again. About the banks other birds were gathering, tomtits and wagtails, sparrows, finches, stonechats. They perched on the brambles and thorn twigs, each one adding his tick or squall or stitter to the general outcry. Some of them had lost mates or fledglings when last they had seen the white peril. "Cronk!" The sound, prolonged and deep, was audible through the screeching and cawing. It came from the beech clump. The white stoat, who had traversed 2/3 of his track, suddenly stopped, sniffing the air. Only one thing had such an acrid smell, and whenever he encountered it, the white stoat got out of daylight into the nearest rabbit hole. He knew his master when he saw and heard and smelled him, Cronk the raven, the king of the crows. The owner of the deep and penetrating voice had flown inland when he had seen Czech the backbreaker slip off his pitch, for sometimes Kronk was able to rob the falcon of what he had struck down. The raven alighted on a branch at the top of a tree, which bowed to his weight. The carrion crow saw him. Kronk was perching on the crow's own lookout branch, which commanded nearly all the ground around the beech clump, but the crow said nothing, for here was the king of the crows, the immemorial owner of 7 miles of coast, from Pencil Rock on Baggy Headland to the Mort Stone, where the realm of his great-grandson, the gaping raven, began, and of thousands of acres of forest, heath, field, covert, and down. Kronk! The raven, looking blacker than any crow, he was so big, jumped off the lookout branch and climbed almost vertically into the air. When about 20 feet above the treetops, he rolled on one wing, dropped a yard, and rolled level again. Then, his playful movement over, he pointed his great black beak at the white stoat and glided down to kill it. The white stoat did not wait while the raven was growing bigger in his downward glide. He turned and galloped back along the track he had started to follow more than 10 minutes before. "Whee-oo!" cried the buzzard from the sky, soaring on cleaver-shaped wings as he watched the white stoat fleeing before more than 50 clamorous birds, almost to be overtaken by the fast raven. The white stoat rippled up the bank and got among the top cover. The withering sword grasses and tough strings of bindweed, tying brambles and briars, the dry thorn branches laid lengthways across old bullock-broken gaps, moved and rustled as he drew his visible body under them. Crows and rooks followed him, flapping to where patches of white showed in the long net of grasses, and trying to perch on stalks of tansy, dock, and hogweed. 3 times the white stoat was pecked as he travelled along the southern bank, but he reached the corner safely and turned up the western bank towards the beech clump. That was his hunting route, an undercover route as well. He pushed his sharp way among the brambles and grasses to the break made by the feet of bullocks scrambling over into the sunken lane below, where McShankles had peered. The gap of earth and stone was bare for 2 yards. On a stone, bedded in the dry earth, stood the raven. Now, stoats, and their smaller relations, the weasels, possess strength and determination which last in fullness unto the moment of death, and the mind of the white stoat was set upon getting to the beech clump. His small flat head pushed out of the grasses, moved up and down, swung sideways, while the nostrils worked nervously at all the hostile scents. The quick movements wove a hole in the grasses, which set around the thin neck like a collar. The gaze of the eye wandered, then it rested on Kronk, standing a yard away. Raven and stoat remained still, brown and pink eyes fixed in the same stare. Instinctively, from the human point of view, the stoat is insane. He lives to kill. He drinks hot blood with frantic joy. Frustrated in his direct purpose, the white stoat's lithe and furious power blazed in his opaline eyes, for he wanted to run forward, and the raven was in the way. His tail swished the grasses behind him. Fumes of anger drove the rooks into the upper air. And then suddenly, at a new short "Grah!" from the crow, the clamour ceased, and the air over the white stoat's head was tumultuous with wings. Raven, crows, rooks, daws, pies, thrushes, finches, tits, all flew away silently, big birds over the field, little birds along the hedge, leaving the white stoat alone. Whereupon, as the cautious scientists say, he resumed his normal occupation. He stepped through his grassy collar, smelt only furze bloom and foxgloves in the air, saw the birds flying away, and forgot them. Without hesitation he ran down the bank and across the grass to his track, for he had never entered the beech plantation to see his mate and cubs any other way. He was near the northern bank when the noise of a single pair of wings made him stop and throw up his head. It was a soft flapping noise belonging to the buzzard, who had been sitting on the bank by the far corner, watching in curiosity the behaviour of the other birds, unnoticed. The buzzard had been alarmed when they had suddenly flown away, but not having heard what they had seen in the sunken lane beyond, and being fearful of taking the air when Raven and Crow were about, it had continued to sit there. The moving lure of the white stoat was too strong for its caution. It forgot the general alarm and flew over to it. On broad brown wings it dropped upon the white stoat, flapping to check its glide and stiffening its legs for the clutch. The white stoat stood up to meet it with his teeth, but as the buzzard was about to strike, the bird looked away, startled by an object appearing in the opening of the 5-barred gate by the road. It was a black and white object, and a man moved behind it. "Private field. Trespassers will be prosecuted." The buzzard's wings beat violently in alarm. They beat wildly, for in a moment the white stoat's teeth had pierced one of its legs above the knee. The buzzard rose up above the level of the bank and tumbled sideways, the weight of the stoat struggling and twisting under it. The buzzard unclenched its feet to be free, but they were clutched on nothing. It dived and tumbled, but could not shake off the jerking weight on its leg. It dropped towards the field again, meaning to stand on the white stoat and rip it up with its hooked beak, as it had ripped up many rats and rabbits, but the sight of man made it rise again. Many feathers floated away in the wind over the beech clump as the hawk swooped and tumbled. The rooks, back at their potato digging, looked up at the struggle. Some flew around the buzzard as it zigzagged overhead and added their cawing to the wailing whistle of the hawk. The white stoat held to the bird's thigh with his teeth and the long claws of his forepaws, and whenever the buzzard's beak came forward to cut open his head, he loosened his bite and snapped at the throat. Sometimes his tail was over his head as he swung to the turns and somersaults of the hawk, but he held on. The flight took them away from the field, which was now distant by 4 lines of banks. After 5 minutes, the wings of the buzzard flapped more heavily and its tumblings were slower. 2 claws of its right uninjured foot had pierced the loose skin of the white stoat's neck and were clenched tightly. It flew as before in and out of the cawing rooks until its bitten leg began to give it pain, when it twirled and wailed towards the ground. A final frenzied tumble in the air flung the white stoat's head near its own, and the buzzard's beak opened to peck the skull. But the white stoat was quicker. His teeth met in the feathers of the buzzard's throat. The feathers sailed away. Chica struck again, but this time his teeth did not click. He had found the jugular vein. Hanging there, he steadily changed colour under the bird's convulsive struggles from white to a streaky or rather spiky red. He drank with immense satisfaction, his eyes closed with a feeling of life flowing into him again. As it neared the earth, the buzzard began to strike with its feet and buffet with its wings and to snap its beak. But the white stoat held on, drawing to himself the hot strength of his enemy. The dying bird thumped on the ground, slowly to draw its wings into its body as a caretaker draws the blinds after death. Its enemy forgotten, the white stoat rippled away, leaving a trail of small feathers sticking to the grasses. The idea of getting to his mate was still as firmly fixed in his mind. He galloped gleefully, licking his jaws as he thought of the game he would play with his cubs. He reached the field, climbed on the bank, and ran along his track past his home under the stone heap. Halfway across he stopped, his nose working at the air that came in swirls from the bank. There was the smell of fresh-turned earth, together with a strange and puzzling taint. He left his track, making a loop to avoid the unseen danger, for everything strange was dangerous to the white stoat. 10 yards off the north bank he seemed to freeze, for his nostrils had dipped into a stream of strong, unfamiliar scent, that of fish and chips. The story called The White Stoat continued. 10 yards off the north bank he seemed to freeze, for his nostrils had dipped into a stream of strong, unfamiliar scent, that of fish and chips. McShankles stood by his newly painted notice board, which leaned on the 5-barred gate. He was mopping his face with a silk handkerchief, his hat pushed back from his pale forehead. A new spade was stuck in a heap of earth at his feet. McShankles saw the white stoat, and his eyes behind his glasses bulged. An ermine! All his fur trade instinct was aroused. He stared after it, shouting, "Hi!" when the white stoat ran up the bank. When he got to the place where the animal had climbed, McShankles swore behind his dentures, for he saw nothing there. However, he was not the man to let such a discovery alone. Picking up a stick, McShankles hurried back through the gate and round the outside corner of the lane. He was just in time to see a tail tipped with black disappear over the low bank at the edge of the spinney. He scrambled through the brambles, holding out an arm to ward off low branches from knocking off his spectacles. Grasping the stick firmly and with head held tense, McShankles walked warily through the beech trees, peering left and right. Visions of a whole colony of ermines made his eyes shine. He came to a wood pile, and had a glimpse of a smaller animal with white patches on its light brown body before it disappeared. McShankles, warm with excitement, crept forward and waited with stick raised for it to run out again. It came out by his feet, but ran in again before the blow fell. McShankles saw another peep out, and then another. The whole place was full of ermines. He began to pull at a branch on the top of the pile. He felt strong as he levered it up, and with a vigorous turning movement threw it down. McShankles was enjoying himself immensely. An expression of market anticipation was on his face. But what is one killer's meat is another killer's poison. Inside the woodpile there was upon the face of the white stoat an expression of the greatest rage. If the little animal could have uttered words, he would have screamed a famous phrase of the frustrated, "My patience is exhausted." The white stoat had been pestered and thwarted nearly all the morning. His play was interrupted, 4 cubs rolling him over and biting him with their milk teeth, and now his mate's home, her person, and that of his offspring were threatened, and by what to the white stoat was mainly an unpleasant smell. He ran out of the woodpile. Looking up into the face of McShankles, he uttered whining, champing noises. When McShankles moved forward with uplifted stick, the white stoat, to his surprise, also moved forward. His harsh, chattering cry rattled in the spinney. He continued to approach McShankles, 14 inches of warning and aggression, who said, "Grr! Get out of it, you beast!" as he struck with his stick and missed. A really frightening noise then came from the white stoat's open mouth. "Chicka, chicka, 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 chicka." Now McShankles' knowledge of the country was not extensive. The chairman of Counterfeit Coney Furs for the Million Limited had no idea that birds and animals were very near in instincts and feelings to men and women, being of the original flesh and spirit. And he certainly did not know that the white stoat's forerunners had been in the plantation since the saplings had been planted there, and long before, when the hillside was incult, a forest of heather and furze where the wild red deer, hunted by William Rufus, son of the Norman conqueror, had roamed. Stoats or fitchies had been there centuries before King William decided that the moor must be his hunting preserve. And since he, the son of the Doomsday Book's originator, had failed to shift them with arrows, pikes, maces, halberds, what hope had McShankles with a stick, and a stick, moreover, that was half rotten? McShankles was therefore most surprised when, immediately after he had made his attempt on the life of the white stoat with a semi-decayed stick, that little animal ran at him and started to climb up his trousers. McShankles, also chairman of the Atomic and Universal Fur Company, branches in Houndsditch and Mayfair, shouted when sharp claws pricked his knee, and struck at the white stoat with his hand. But so quick was Chaker, and so sure his eye, that he bit through the tip of a finger before the blow knocked him off. McShankles turned to leave the plantation. He shouted for help, when he saw similar animals running out of the woodpile, apparently in response to the white stoat's chatter. He blundered through low branches to the bank, brambles clawing his clothes and filling him with fear. He stopped in the lane, and to his horror saw that he was being followed. Chicka, 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 chicka. Wheeling high over the plantation, above the rooks and the crows, Kronk the raven watched the intruder running to the gate, pulling it open, and nearly falling over the strange black and white object that had been puzzling the wary Kronk. McShankles closed the gate, and, breathing heavily behind his notice-board, felt safe on his own property. His own property! The white stoat had something to say about that. Hack! Chicka! 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 Mr. McShankles was pulling his handkerchief out of his cuff, where it had been tucked for many years, when the white stoat and all his family ran round the corner. Hack! Chicka! Hack! Chicka! Chicka! McShankles ran as far as the middle of the field, then turned and stared at the pack. He felt a dreadful desire to remain standing still, a sensation which was quite usual to the various quarries of the white stoat. McShankles, naturalized British citizen and law-abiding man, gave an automatic glance round for a policeman to stop it. Chicka! 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 High in the air, Kronk the raven, who in his time had felt the unhealthy fascination of being approached by a pack of hunting stoats, watched the man standing still until the white stoat was almost to him. Only then did McShankles turn and run to the lower bank. He scrambled up and stood among the brambles until the white pursuer reached the bank. He jumped down with head turned to see if they were following. Hack! Hack! Chicka! Hack! Chicka! Wheeling on firm wings, the raven watched the man plodding across the next field, and the plunging canter of bullocks downwind when they got the musky scent of stoat. He watched him across another field, and so to the road. McShankles ran on, slower and slower, groaning that if only he got out of it without blood poisoning from his bitten finger, he would sell the field and never go near the horrible place again. His hat fell off halfway to the village and lay among some cabbages. This suited me, for as you may have guessed long ago, I had already regretted the foolish impulse which had led me to sell the place, where for many summers I had lived a wild, free life, and, minding my own business, had never had a cross word with any bird or animal. And it rains all the time in Connemara. Meeting McShankles, hatless in the village, I did a deal with him, there and then. In Charlie's bar we exchanged expressions of goodwill, together with the wad of notes from me to him, and the receipt from him to me. No hard feelings? None, Mr. McShankles. "Okay, pal," says McShankles. "Here's the key of your heart. Blimey, I don't know how you fellows can live round here." "Oh, we get along, sir." After some bread and cheese we walked up the hill, upon the road this time. McShankles' Rolls-Royce awaited him, and hatless he drove away, after pressing several wonderful rings into my palm, for an instant only, of course, as he shook hands. When the Rolls-Royce was out of sight, I went down to the cabbage field and retrieved the black Foreign Office hat. It was too big for me and sat down over my ears, but I had conceived another use for it, and returning to the field, unlocked the oak door of my hut with the big key in the wooden lock. The click of the big lock was heard by the white stoat in the plantation. He came bounding down under the trees for his saucer of bread and milk. Jacob and I were old friends, you see, and had been since I had found him half-grown years before with his front paw in a rabbit trap. Now that he had a mate and cubs, there was hope that they would keep the rabbits down, and I had been a fool to forget this when, in exasperation that all my lettuces had been eaten, I had sold the place. As for the black hat, that went under the stone pile in a little space or cave, where Chaker, the white stoat, might sleep warm during the cold nights. The next story is called The Dog Who Ate His Punishment. This is the story of a dog called Snapper, a good name for him, and an American gentleman who lived for a month or two in Devon on the funds provided by a travelling research scholarship. The assistant professor went to Devon with the idea of writing a history of the French Revolution. Our story opens one fine May morning when the assistant professor of comparative literature, to give him his proper style and title, looked out of his study window and cursed. In the middle of the lawn below was a small circular flower bed, out of which grew a cypress tree. It was not the sight of the tree that caused annoyance, but the fact, as it appeared to him, that it was rapidly being dug up. Actually, the tree had stood there for a couple of 100 years or more. The age of the digger was scarcely half a couple of 100 days, and the hole was not more than a foot deep and about 5 inches wide. Nevertheless, a shower of earth was descending upon the lawn. The assistant professor pushed open the casement and bawled, "Hey, Snapper! Grr, you! Go someplace else! Go kill real rats! Where did that darn woman put the soda? I guess the farmer's pork is all nubs and gas inside me." He patted his waistcoat with mournful self-sympathy. "Geez, I wish I had that dog's outlook on life," he said to himself. "He doesn't trouble about the French Revolution." The soil, which had been increasing for the past few minutes between the hind legs of the terrier, ceased to heave. A head and ears dishevelled with earth were withdrawn, and a thing called Snapper wagged its tail once uncertainly. It turned its earthy face to the window, laid back its long ears, and showed its teeth in a grin. "Naughty boy!" said the assistant professor, in a tone of voice that caused the back of the puppy to straighten, its ears and tail stump to become vertical. "Mustn't dig up other folks' trees. The British author I rent the house from will sock me for dilapidations. Although, strictly speaking, it should be deracinations, except that the word deracination doesn't occur in my lease. Mind you don't wag that tail right off, Snapper. Go play with that bull again. I'll try and take you for a walk this afternoon. Good boy, Snapper. Geez, you're a cheerful little guy. What a lot of kicks you get out of life." The puppy was now running round the lawn at its fastest pace, round and round the cypress tree. At speed, its hair was pressed against its body, and it seemed to have enormous black eyebrows. "Wish I could feel like you do," said the assistant professor. "I guess it's an illusion to grade you a lower species just because your ears are long and hairy, and you run on 4 legs and catch your fleas without mental poise and philosophical detachment. Well, there you are, enjoying yourself in the sunshine, never needing soda after your meals, without giving a darn why you are or who you are. And here am I, sitting day after day writing a lot of bunk about something that probably never happened among a lot of cockaded, cock-eyed morons nearly 150 years ago. Wait till I've broken the back of this chapter on Talleyrand, Snapper. Then I'll take you for a walk this afternoon, a real walk." The assistant professor went back to his chair and stared gloomily at the mass of books and papers cluttering the desk. Left alone, the puppy lifted his nose and sniffed the air for an interesting smell. He was at that stage of his self-education when the allurements of reality and imagination were almost equal. No interesting smells being on the air, he began to imagine a colony of rats at the end of the hole under the cypress. He was about to dig for them when the scent of his favourite cat set across his nostrils. Up went his tail and his ears. A few moments later he saw the cat, walking with slow unconcern up the rose path on its way to the kitchen door and the dustbin. He rushed forward jubilantly. The cat fluffed herself, flattened her ears, opened her claws, and spat. Snapper barked with joy. Very soon he had manoeuvred her to his favourite pitch at the edge of the lawn. He pranced before her, darting left and right, making feints forward and then springing back. She lay under the edge of the lawn on the path, showing only her moving tail-tip and her flattened ears. Ruff! 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 Then occurred what Snapper had been deliriously awaiting. The cat sprang and struck at him. Snapper, feeling very clever, nimbly avoided her clip. She clawed the grass, and after a baffled hiss, chased him round the tree. Snapper was so happy that he ran round the tree 3 times after the cat had retired to her base on the path at the edge of the lawn. To the left and to right he pranced again, defying her, baring his teeth at her, feinting forward, always alert to dodge the sudden lunge and the slash of claws. Glad of the excuse to quit the pangs of writing a masterpiece, the assistant professor looked down at them from his window. Then he saw the farmer, whose horrid pork was resisting every assault of the assistant professor's gastric juices, walking up the garden path. The terrier raised its long bat-like ears, uttered a bark, and trotted to meet the farmer. In one hand the farmer held a dead pullet by its yellow legs. Snapper nosed the bird and leapt up, uttering a gurgling growl of delight. The farmer grunted, knocked it against the terrier's head, and growled, "Get off, you limmer! Next time I catch you nosing round my shed, you'll get something you aren't expecting. That's the second bird you've had in one day, you beastly little beggar." "Good morning," the professor called from the window in an English accent. Then, reverting to his native Connecticut, "Hello! Has my darned dog been at your chickens again? Just a minute, I'll be right down." 5 minutes afterwards the farmer was returning down the garden path, and the assistant professor, a methodical, industrious, and ambitious young man, was entering in his Diary of Work in Progress, Europe, under the heading Incidental Expenses, the item, "1 chicken, bought from Whiskers, 4 shillings. 6 weeks before there had been this entry, 1 pedigree Jack Russell Terrier, bought from Henry Williamson, £5, 5 shilling, and no pennies. That afternoon the assistant professor sat in his study groaning, forcing the pen slowly across the paper. 6 weeks of his vacation were gone, and he had not yet got halfway through his schedule, which was to bring him to Chapter 80 of Volume 4 of An Historical Outline of the French Revolution. He had been working on this masterpiece for more than 10 years. For more than 10 years the assistant professor had been reading every available book already published on the subject. For more than 10 years he had been reading and reviewing for various highbrow literary weeklies every new book on the subject published in the U.S. When one highbrow literary weekly folded, the professor continued to review for its successor until that died, and then he went after the next one. During the 10 years he had fairly established within himself the idea that he was the American authority on how not to write about the French Revolution. Every book on the French Revolution reviewed by the assistant professor was discovered to be deficient in this or that aspect of behaviorism, faulty in this or that interpretation of psychological or character motivation. This book or that book, declared the reviewer, was not the comprehensive masterpiece that was awaited by the world, the masterpiece that would reveal the decline and fall of idealism in the light of modern knowledge, that would transcend even Thomas Carlyle. A few highballs helped to clarify now and again the essential urgency of his own mission in the matter of writing the definitive opus on the French Revolution. Nevertheless, In spite of deficiencies in aspects of behaviorism and faults in interpretation of psychological or character motivation, every new book on the French Revolution added a weight to the appalling mass of material to be worked into the comprehensive masterpiece awaited by the world, which accompanied the assistant professor everywhere. A mass which, at the moment when the professor brought a pullet for twice its market value, filled 3 immense trunks and weighed over 1/4 of a ton. If this awful fact, and what it signifies, has not already flattened the reader of this little story, please be reassured immediately. Pray remain seated. In a moment or two you will be watching the little dog, who waited in vain for its promised walk, playing with its friend the bull. You'll hear only once more of the manuscript of An Historical Outline of the French Revolution, which, with its 500 pounds of parasites, was only dragged in to show how, in spite of his modern way of talking, the assistant professor was really a very cultured person. So, while with weary determination he is digging into one of his several trunks among the moths and mildew in order to verify and embody, away with culture, the word is pinch, in order to pinch a few facts from one of the old review copies therein, come on tiptoe beside me and watch the technique of Snapper with the bull. The bull does not want to play with any silly little dog. He is a young bull, but recently separated from his mother, the Aberdeen Angus pedigree cow, all of whose milk he has sucked during the first 8 months of his life. He is square almost when seen from behind, and the line of his back is straight. Shoulders all beef. He is what is called polled. He has no horns, which is perhaps as well for Snapper, who anyway would not care. Was he not descended from a line of fierce and eager little earth dogs, bred to tackle badger and fox underground? The bull is standing in the shade of a beech tree as Snapper trots to within 2 yards of him. Snapper crouches in the grass. The bull turns his head with its curly black poll and stares at the white crouching object with the bright eyes. Snapper makes his ears cock, or rather he makes them stand up straight, for they are too ludicrously tall for the action to be called cocking, and lies still in the grass, taunting the bull to play. "Humph," says the bull, and swishes his tail. "Ruff," replies Snapper, making a sort of amiable growling in his throat. The bull slowly turns away his head and gives an extra flick to his tail. Snapper leaps up and runs round to face him, collapsing in the grass again. The bull bends his neck and gently lifts his nose with the copper ring in the direction of the dog. Growls Snapper with delight. He runs to and fro before the bull several times before collapsing in the grass, pointing himself at the bull with shining eyes, inviting him to lower his head so that he, Snapper, may have the pleasure of springing away from the thrilling snort of his nostril. The bull turns away. Snapper barks. Raucousness is now in his voice. The bull does not want to play, so Snapper runs twistedly at the bull, showing his eye teeth in a grin and snapping a couple of inches away from the bull's muzzle. Ruff! Ruff! The bull glares and snorts. Ha! Ha! Pants Snapper, prancing. Ruff! Ruff! He runs at the bull again, leaping aside, falling over, wriggling quickly upright, and making a circle away from his glaring friend, the enemy. So happy is Snapper that he dashes round the bull 6 times before crouching again at the challenge. The bull paws the ground and pretends to graze. Snapper, after several feints in the grass, then threatens the bull by pushing himself on his belly towards him. To lure the bull, he gets up again, shakes himself, and pretends to stare at a pigeon flying over. He yawns, making a plaintive sound. Nothing happens. The bull crops or pretends to crop at a tuft of rank marsh grass, which cattle never eat. Snapper walks behind him, collapses to scratch himself, then suddenly runs in and nips the idly swinging tail at its tuft. The bull swings round, snorting, and paws the ground. Snapper barks, crouches on his forepaws. The bull trots forward with lowered head. His eyes gleam as he runs at the dog. Snapper flees swiftly. Only when he has scrambled under the gate does he face the bull. Very bravely he thrusts his head between the lower bars and snarls a challenge. The bull has scared him. "Puff!" snorts the bull, jarring the gate with his curly brow. Snapper nips his nose, not hard, but enough to make the bull swish his tail violently. The bull holds up his head, preparing to shut his eyes and to toss gate and dog over his back. Crash! Crack! Snapper turns tail and flees silently. "Ah, you!" roars the farmer, coming down the hedge and hearing the splintering of the lower bar of the gate. "You young limmer, you! Wait till I get near enough to put my stick about 'ee. Go after something your own size, why don't 'ee?" he yells after the dog. "Go and kill some of their own rats round the stables." The small white dog, its long black ears raised in alarm, rapidly vanishes. Amusing little cove, isn't he? As soon as he was out of sight of the farmer, Snapper stopped and rolled luxuriously in the grass. Something very nice and sweet-smelling lay in the grass. He had rolled on it many times before. Several weeks before he had played with it, shaking and tearing with rage, but now the feeling he had for it was quite different. Of course there are in the USA canine psychologists whose work precedes that of the genii who inhabit the halls of memory, of doggy delight, wherein pets are embalmed, stuffed, and otherwise preserved in the happy hunting grounds of eternity incorporated. Without doubt a doctor of that school of canine psychology would gravely have pronounced, "Snapper has a manic-depressive complex." Was it caused by some fixation in early life? The professor might have inquired. Some dread shock in whelphood? Certainly the dog had bad dreams, wherein his legs and nose worked agitatedly, and his ears rose and fell like English railway signals at the end of a prolonged fog. Snapper is the first morbid dog in fiction. Definitely he had the cadaver complex, or maybe the dingo complex, for he delighted to roll on the flattened corpse of a rat. After rolling for several minutes he arose, shook himself, inspected the corpse, performed a thoughtful ceremony upon it, and trotted off. He had recalled one of the sounds issuing from the farmer. Rats. The farmer at this period was much troubled by rats. His farm was near a hunting stables. Recently some of the stable buildings had been improved. Rickety wooden bins for oats and bran and other food had been replaced by modern bins of galvanized iron. The rats, which had grown numerous and fat on plundered corn, were now shut out. Their runs and highways had been stopped with wads of wire netting, rammed into the holes, and the floor covered with concrete. A determined rat might eventually gnaw through concrete unless it were made of granite chip, but the sharp points of wire defeated them. So they migrated to the farm. Snapper had spent much time in digging and blowing and snuffling and whining in the farmer's woodshed, his long ears stiff with excitement, but only in dreams had he got his teeth across one. As he went towards the farmyard he forgot the rats, for he saw his friends the 15 pigs. At least Snapper must have considered them his friends, for he always ran gleefully towards them when he saw them. But it is doubtful if the pigs thought of him as their friend. One of them, however, the sow, who weighed about 1/4 of a ton, definitely regarded Snapper as her friend. They were all pink. Their family name was Long White Lop-Eared Pig. Snapper made 2 discriminations among them. One was much bigger than the others and unplayable. The other was much smaller than the rest and could be rolled over in the mud squealing. This wretched individual was technically known as a cad. He was the smallest of the farrow. His head was too big and his body too small, and only laziness on the farmer's part had prevented him from being killed at birth. He would make neither pork nor bacon. In the farmer's words, he ate more than the head-on was worth. Even so, the poor cad ate little enough, always being squeezed out in the scramble. He was Snapper's favourite, for Snapper could do what he liked with him. He could pull the cad's tail, nip his ears and jowl and nose, chase him all through the midden, and roll him on his back in the muck. Play with the cad, however, did not usually last very long, because what Snapper really liked was a fight, or what to him was a fight. The larger pigs would run and dodge him for a while, and then stand still looking at him between their ears. This gave Snapper a thrill, for when they stood like that they were ready to snap at him. Then he could dance around on his toes. As for the lumbering sow, she grunted and snuffled about the farmyard and took no heed of him. She had long given up hope of any excitement from his presence. Once Snapper had rolled by accident off an empty barrel lying on its side outside the farmhouse door, and fallen sprawling on her back in the precise place where she needed to be scratched. He had not known that the sow's grunts were of pleasure. He had been wary of her long snout ever since. Snapper had been playing with the piglets, causing squeaks and grunts and sudden patterings in the mud for about 10 minutes, and was in the act of pulling the curl out of a pink tail, when he was startled by a gruff voice shouting terribly near, "Ah, you're here again, be ye? Well, I like your bloody cheek. Go on, out of it!" the farmer bellowed, his red face working. "Us'll be seeing Maister soon to get 'ee a good trimming. You come here once too often, my little boy, and find yourself looking at the wrong end of my gun." The farmer held another dead chicken in his hand. Nearly all its breast feathers had been torn off, and it was bitten in many places. Snapper fled. The howls of a dog being trimmed came from the assistant professor's hired house. Afterwards the dead fowl was solemnly fastened by string to the dog's neck. The professor hurled a stick into the hedge. "Remember, wear feather, Snapper," he intoned solemnly in an Englishman's sporting voice, adding, "Gee, I'm sorry, but I've got to do it." Shortly afterwards an entry was made under the heading Incidental Expenses in the Diary of Work in Progress, Europe, 1 chicken bought from Whiskers, 5 shillings. The assistant professor stood by the window of the study. Papers, books, pens, pipes, and cigarette ends were everywhere. He addressed the woe-begone figure of the dog sitting under the cypress tree below. "Morally speaking, I ought to be wearing the darn thing next my gullet," he soliloquized. "Let me get the back of this chapter broken, then I'll take you walks." Hearing the voice, Snapper looked up and wagged his tail, whereupon the voice said sternly, "Wear feather, Snapper. Wear feather. Isn't that the correct Britisher's admonition? Wear feather, Snapper. Poor little devil, you're all fire and fun and no one to play with. Wait till I've gotten rid of this moron Mirabeau, then we'll have some swell walks right across Exmoor. Meanwhile, wear feather, Snapper." Snapper watched the window for a few minutes after Master had disappeared, and then stared about him, wondering what to do. He sighed and tried half-heartedly to play with the chicken slung around his neck, but it did not respond, and he thought he would sleep. At that moment his favourite cat, one of half a dozen that lived in the barns and sheds of the farm, walked across the lawn on its way to the dustbin. Immediately his ears stood up. He ran at her, but the weight attached to his collar made him stumble and fall over. Instantly the cat pounced, bit him through the ear, got in several pleasing rips with her hind legs on his back, spat at him, smacked him on the nose as he struggled up yelping, then fled, leaving him to walk slowly back to his hole under the cypress, wondering why he had been hurt. He tried to lick his nose, and in doing so got tangled up with the chicken. Hearing this yelp, the assistant professor flung down the pen he had been gnawing, got up and walked to the window. He was in time to see Snapper, as he thought, trying to eat the chicken. That would never do. It was intended that the dog should drag about his victim for 2 days, becoming so humiliated, so sick of chicken, that he would never look at another one in his life. But if Snapper were treating it as a joke— "Wear feathers, Snapper!" bellowed the professor. "Aye, aye!" cried the voice of the farmer, who was hastening up the garden path. "You'm just in time with your advice, sir." Indignantly he held up the corpse of a 3rd chicken. "Well, I'm darned," said the professor. He thought a moment. "But surely the dog has not had time to go round to your place and come back here again. Why, I've scarcely had time to write a sentence between the time of licking him and tying that chicken round his neck and this your 3rd visit." "I'm very sorry, sir," said the farmer, "but here's my poult. Beautiful little bird it be, too. And there, if you'll please to look, be the marks of worrying, identical with the marks on the other poults. If you'll please to step down a minute, sir, I'll show 'ee. Ah, you may well cringe," he growled to Snapper, who was creeping off in a sidling walk, ears down, body curved, his tail stump nervously fluttering. "Come here, sir," shouted the professor. Snapper turned on his back, held his pointed nose up as though he were trying to smell a cloud in the sky, and waited for the inevitable pain. Together, the assistant professor and the farmer compared the marks on the fresh chicken with those of the bedraggled thing attached to the dog. Snapper, lying on his back, looked first at one face, then at the other, anxiously awaiting their verdict. His eyes under the black eyebrows rolled, showing the whites, as he watched Master going towards that part of the hedge where the stick had been flung. Master returned with the stick. Snapper sprang up, meaning to run away and hide in the new hole he had been excavating in the coal shed, but he was handicapped by the weight round his neck. Master caught him and whacked him, and as Snapper crept away into the hedge with both ears pressed flat on his skull, the farmer said, putting 5 shillings and 6pence into his pocket, "Well, thank you, sir. I don't want to raise trouble, but I'm a poor man and I've got my living to make. The price be market price for growing birds, which put on a lot of flesh at this season of the year, sir." "The law of supply and demand has always puzzled me," said the professor, "but at last I see quite clearly that as the supply diminishes, so the value increases. Say, I've an idea. Why not let me buy the remaining pullets from you now, 5 shillings each? Then those that Snapper doesn't want I'll sell back to you at the end of the month for what I pay for them now." "Thank you, sir, I'm sure. But who will be paying for their food meanwhile?" "Geez, I guess you've got me licked," said the professor. "I understand why all revolutions are bound to fail. I'll have to keep Snapper tied up, that's all. Good afternoon." The professor returned to his study and made a further entry into his diary of expenses. Further contribution to the chicken racket, 5 and 6pence. "The horny old buzzard," he muttered, "and he took the darn thing away with him, too." After walking round the room several times and trying to light a pipe that was too tightly packed, the assistant professor sat down at his desk once more. To his surprise and delight, his pen began to move over the paper rapidly in pursuit of a scathing criticism of French peasantry, small farmers, and all bourgeoisie. Page after page he filled with what he felt to be a brilliantly argued plea for the necessity of authoritarianism. At last he ceased, and looking at his watch was astonished to see that nearly 2 hours had elapsed. He had forgotten all about Snapper. Anyhow, now he could take the dog for a walk with a clear conscience. He went downstairs into the garden and was about to whistle for the puppy dog, when from the farmyard across the lane he heard the roar of the farmer's voice, followed by 2 shots and the high yelping of a dog. Clenching his fists, the assistant professor ran in the direction of the farmyard. Now, after the second thrashing, the trembling Snapper had remained in the hedge. But soon one of his ears had raised itself, and he yawned. Gazing around, he smelled nothing to do. He arose and shook himself. Then he walked away, dragging the cold thing beside him, and sat for a while under the holly bush by the kitchen door. He watched the cat eating the remains of his dinner without even uttering one growl of querulous protest. Having licked the plate clean, the cat then sat beside it and thoroughly washed its face and paws, watched by the shivering Snapper, who had curled himself on an uneasy bed of dead holly leaves, his head pillowed on the thing which was fastened to him. Having completed her leisurely toilet, the cat got up and walked back towards the farmhouse. Snapper then walked over and woefully inspected the empty plate. He yawned, stretched himself, and trotted back to the cypress tree, animated by the thought of digging out imaginary rats. Encumbered by the dead weight round his neck, he soon grew tired, and collapsing into the hole, went to sleep. Sometimes he whined in his sleep, dreaming of Master chasing him with a stick as big as Master, the end of which was a cat's paw with great curved claws, Master and cat's paw always just behind his tail, however hard he tried to race away. And although he was running his fastest, he was not moving, and although he was not moving, the terrible cat's paw never actually struck him. With relief, Snapper awoke from this nightmare and looked about him, shivering. Master's window was blank. He heard sounds of distant pigs grunting, cows lowing, hens clucking, but they excited no desire in him. He curled into a tighter circle, settled his head across his paws, swallowed the water in his mouth, sighed with contentment that he was not really being beaten, but was safely tucked into his retreat, and went to sleep again. As the assistant professor was writing the last of his indictment, which was scrapped that same evening for reasons that soon will be apparent, Snapper awoke, remembered his plate by the kitchen door, and went back to see if he had dreamed about the cat, or if the rest of his dinner was still there. Finding the plate empty and the scent of the cat still lying strong, he decided to follow it. The line took him down the garden path, through the cabbages and potatoes, through the radish bed, among the marrow plants, through the beans, down another lesser gardener's path made of cinders, and so to the garden gate. The cat had jumped the gate, but Snapper crawled underneath, dragging the dead chicken with him. He sniffed for a while at a place where the cat had sat and completed its toilet, and then followed beside a hedge until he came to the wood stacks, beyond which was the woodshed adjoining the chicken house, in which the farmer had discovered the succession of marketable corpses. This shed was a place of much interest for Snapper. His tail went up, his ears went up, his nose went down to the earth, and forgetting his humiliation, he started to work along one of the many lines of scent which were laid on the earth. The line led him to a new hole in the corner of the shed, into which he began to dig with great excitement. While he was working his forepaws as fast as he could, with pauses for deep sniffs into the earth, he heard the loud clucking of a poult beyond the opposite wooden wall of the shed.